Xaml is sort of the main programming language of WPF, and I think almost everyone would agree that it's very much a variation on HTML and CSS. So if we do a new project, select WPF application and say call it WPF06. Click OK. Notice what comes up is similar to Windows Forms, but different in that there's XAML. You know, there's a designer view and a code behind view, which is just like Windows Forms, but then we have this additional view at the bottom, which is the XAML view. And these tags that are very similar to HTML, like if you call this HTML instead of window and /HTML, you're looking at an HTML document. And just like HTML, there's attributes on the tags. But the fact is, XAML is actually quite a bit more complicated than HTML. There's a number of different types of tags, like object elements and attached properties and property or element properties and things like that I'm going to get into in other videos. But right now I just want to talk about the attributes. So if we drag over some kind of a control to the designer view, like one at a button, that's nice and simple. You notice that results in a tag being created for a button. And why don't I somewhat break this up so we can see it all better. And there's a number of characteristics represented in attributes, like horizontal alignment, margin, vertical alignment, width, and like HTML and unlike Windows Forms, we don't have a hard-coded coordinate system. In fact, it's with the grid layout, it becomes like a flow control that will actually expand and contract based on the size of the window and generally act like HTML. So it's this odd blending of HTML and CSS and C# in the IDE. And the great thing about it in version 2010 is you can do practically everything from the designer view and the code behind, just like you're working with Windows Forms, and all these XAML tags get generated. Or technically this would be called object element, the button. And there's three ways to change these attributes. One way is to just change it on the design view. You can move this around and you'll notice the things like the margin change based on where I moved it to, and I can expand it, and things like the height and width change based on my expanding the button. So one way to change it is just change it in the designer, and another way to change it is over in the properties panel. And certainly for a button, one of the main ways to do that is there's two tabs at the top. You notice property and events, which also is very much like the Windows Forms. So if I press on events and then double click on click, we generate a event handler and the code behind, which I talked about pretty extensively in the last video. And we also have changed the attributes once again to add a click with the code behind event handler referenced. So one is the designer view, two is the properties, and then of course the other is just editing the Xaml directly, which people that are coming from an HTML, CSS background will probably prefer this technique because it's like writing HTML in order to create the document. So if I wanted to change this width to say 80, you notice the button radically changes up here. If I change the height to say 80 also, notice we end up with a square looking button instead of the button we had before, and we did it entirely by editing the Xaml. So the three ways you can change the attributes of an object element are: you can directly edit it in Xaml, change it in the properties pane, or change it in the design view. So that more or less covers what I wanted to talk about in this video. In the next video we'll talk more about object elements and the idea of having complex properties that are nested within the object elements, which is an entirely different way of writing code than the whole C# Windows form concept. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video and learned a lot, and I hope to see you in the next video, and I'd appreciate it if you'd subscribe.